Part 64 of the Epistle to the Hebrews, Exhortations to Manifest Love. In many ancient cultures, hospitality was a solemn duty. It was regarded as a sacred obligation by the ancient Greeks and Romans, one that was approved by Zeus, the god and protector of strangers. The Egyptians claimed it as a meritorious deed in life. For the Bedouins, it was an expression of righteousness. Hospitality is one form of worship. In the early church, it was an important ministry. Christians were often displaced by persecution. Public inns were scarce, costly, and sometimes dangerous. Traveling evangelists were to be supported through hospitality. 3 John 5-8. Thus, hospitality was to be manifested by those men who would serve as elders, bishops, 1 Timothy 3, verse 2, Titus 1, verse 8, those widows who would be taken into the number, 1 Timothy 5, verses 9 and 10, all Christians, Romans 12, verse 13, 1 Peter 4, verse 9. A reason to practice hospitality. For by doing so some have unwittingly entertained angels. The example of Abraham, Genesis 18, verses 1-8. The example of Lot, Genesis 19, verses 1-3. The point is not that we should expect angels to literally come our way, though some we entertain may serve as his messengers. Angel means messenger in a providential sense. The key idea is that you never know what hospitality might bring. One often receives unexpected benefits from his or her guests. There is always the blessedness of giving. Acts 20, verse 35. The physical need for hospitality today may not be as great as it was in ancient times, but the spiritual need, the strengthening of spiritual ties, is just as important. Therefore, we need to be hospitable to one another without grumbling. 1 Peter 4, verse 9. Toward prisoners and the persecuted, a call to remember them. Christians were often persecuted and imprisoned for their faith. Prior to his conversion, Paul often led the assault. Acts 8, verse 3, Acts 26, 9-11. Later, he himself was a prisoner. Philippians 1, verses 12-18, and Colossians 4, verse 18. The Hebrews had already shown their love toward such prisoners. Hebrews 10, verses 32-34. To remember and visit Christians in prison was an act of devotion to Christ himself. Matthew 25, verses 35-40. Their provisions for the prisoners would be a sweet-smelling sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. Philippians 4, verse 18. They could also remember them in their prayers. Acts 12, verse 5. Ephesians 6, verses 18-20. Their loving remembrance was to be influenced by their sense of fellowship in their brethren's suffering, as if chained with them. The Lord intended such connection between the members of his body. If one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 26. By their awareness of their own vulnerability, since you yourselves are in the body also, they would not be immune to persecution themselves. Therefore, they should be sensitive to the suffering of others. Conclusion. In providing a new and living way, it is true that Jesus made possible a close relationship between man and God. Hebrews 10, verses 19-22. But the purity we experience through obeying the truth is not just that we may have fellowship with God, but also that we may have fellowship with each other in sincerity and love. 1 Peter 1, verses 22-23. Thus, it naturally follows that as we draw near to God, we should also draw near to one another. This we do when we manifest love toward brethren, toward strangers, toward prisoners and the persecuted. May we all be diligent to heed the exhortation to let brotherly love continue. This concludes Part 64 of the book of Hebrews.